Round 3 of ABBFormula E Season 6 took us to Santiago, Chile. The last race, Saudi Arabia, was 2 months ago, but it was well worth the wait. If you haven't seen it, spoilers ahead, but also, here are the highlights.
And we go green in Santiago. Not a great start from Evans. Verline immediately pulls over towards the inside, but Evans gets it covered. Jean-Eric Verne is hitting a Mercedes.
Oh, big move from the Nissan of
Bird goes round. Mortara just activated attack mode and now he's sent it up the inside of Massa. These two have not played this clever at all. And is Massa in the wall there? Yeah. He was certainly all over the place. Max Guenther in the BMW to the outside. Hangs it on around the outside and gets through. It's Verne. That front left bodywork that has been plaguing him all race after he picked up the damage earlier on.
Turn 9, is he going to go to the inside turn 10? Here he comes.
Oh, that's late, and they hit each other. Da Costa forces his way past. Now that is robust. He goes defensive. Guenther goes to the outside at turn 9 and he's done it. The BMW of Max Guenther gets into the lead through the final corner to win in Santiago and win in Formula E for the first time. Max Guenther.
Thank you, as always, to Formula E for sending over the highlights for us all to enjoy. What a race, guys. What an absolute awesome race. Yes, it's been 2 months, and that's not ideal, and it's something I still believe the sport needs to address, but come on, there's not a lot more we could have asked for this weekend. Right from the off, this was a circuit last season which I absolutely adored. They made some tweaks to the circuit this year, which I was a little bit hesitant about, but they worked. They really did work. Attack mode in the same place as last year, a brilliant spot for it around the outside of turn 3 it was this year. Last year that was turn 2, but turn 3 this year. They got rid of the tiny little kink in the long left-hander throughout the second sector. They got rid of that, and that was a big improvement. And they also changed the final 2 hairpins a little bit as well, which actually overall this year produced more overtakes, despite the fact there were still 2 hairpins. Anyway, the changes were fantastic. Before we get into the race result, this is how the starting grid looked, and this is how qualifying went. Mitch Evans, the first driver that wasn't Alexander Sims to score a pole position this season. A big statement of intent from Jaguar, but there's kind of a bit of a caveat on qualifying at the moment. Because we're so early on in the season, there are a lot of drivers that have struggled in those early rounds, that being in later groups of qualifying really helped them out. However, that's kind of a theme that's going to be seen throughout the entire season, that drivers who are in later groups are going to have better qualifying. Although saying that, Alex Sims, 2 pole positions in a row was impressive, I'll give him that. But take nothing away, brilliant lap from Mitch Evans, especially in Super Pole, comfortably in front of some of the other drivers. But there was a BMW on the front row, that didn't change. But this time it wasn't Sims, it was Max Guenther on the front row, the 22-year-old German in his first full year of Formula E. He did a few races last year in and out of the team at Dragon, but his first full season impressed, I would say, in the first couple of rounds. Of course, was on the podium in that second race, but got taken off the podium afterwards thanks to a penalty. But really, this weekend seemed to have a much better grips of the car early on. Front row, fantastic effort. Other drivers of note, Pascal Wehrlein up in P3 with a unspectacular Mahindra car of what we've seen anyway so far in Season 6. And Oliver Turvey, fair play, fair play. P5 in a Neo 333 car is ridiculous. And again, the qualifying system helps, but still, that car is basically the Williams of Formula E. And to be that far up, to even just squidge in the top 10 would be a brilliant result. But to be in Super Pole and to be in front of Buemi, I mean, he had his own issues, Buemi, but still, P5, got to give credit where credit's due. And also, other drivers of note really struggling in qualifying. Some of the big dogs. Ollie Rowland into the barriers. That caught Lucas de Grassi out, who was behind him. But then Lucas himself made a mistake a few corners later. Just missed the barriers. We also had Robin Freins, who span a brilliant 360 through turn 1, just missing the wall. That cost Eduardo Mortara a bit of lap time, but he still started up in P7. It was a brilliant start to the weekend, and the race itself was an absolute peach. Every second of that E-Prix, there was something happening. Not once in the race did my eyes leave the screen, did I even consider going to another room, going on my phone. It didn't even cross my mind. There was always something going on. Fights at the front, fights at the midfield, drivers in the wall. It was a great race. I actually think that was my favourite race of Season 6 so far. Obviously, it helped that some of my favourite drivers were fighting for the lead. But I think whoever you support in Formula E, there was something going on throughout this race. Moving on to the race order, how I'm going to construct this week's race review is a little bit like what I've done in Formula 1 for some of the races at the end of 2019. Just go through the race order, try and have a little discussion about each driver's race, then we don't miss out on a particular event or a particular driver. This is your top 12 for the Santiago E-Prix. And yes, Max Guenther, his first win in Formula E. A really tough race, I would say, to be your first victory. It wasn't plain sailing like we have seen some drivers be able to do in the past. Of course, Sebastian Buemi was a master of leading from the front in Formula E, but that certainly was not the case this weekend. It looked in the early stages of the race, actually, that it was going to be Mitch Evans who ended in P3 at the end of the race. It looked like Mitch Evans was going to be that driver who was going to be able to just go off into the distance. Of course, starting on pole position, use those 2 attack modes. Yes, 2 attack modes super early on in the race. Guenther, who was having a fight with Pascal Wehrlein for the first half of the E-Prix, eventually Wehrlein, whether that Mahindra car really was as bad as it looked, we don't know, but seemed to really be struggling, Pascal Wehrlein, with overheating of the battery, maybe battery usage, so he dropped back, and that allowed Guenther just to reel in Mitch Evans, and he was getting closer and closer, and eventually was able to use that attack mode to pass Evans and take the lead. And it also then seems like Evans, who definitely wasn't happy with the team situation, I can understand why the team went with that strategy. We have seen historically in Formula E now, since we have been introduced to attack mode, that most drivers, usually it's beneficial just to get rid of attack mode, especially if a late safety car comes out. And with the new rules coming in, that you can't use the attack mode under the safety car, it kind of hurts you if you've got one late on and the field is bunched up. So I understood what Jaguar were going for. With the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't the right thing to do, and Guenther, who had that extra attack mode, used it brilliantly, got past Evans. There was kind of a second wind from Evans, whether he was a little bit frustrated and just wanted to get past, tried to go for a couple of moves. There was a bit of a ding-dong battle between the two of them, but eventually Guenther was able to take the hold of that particular battle. However, late on, it was Da Costa who really came into his own. Da Costa's race started back in P10, but for the majority of the race, and this was great to see, was in a fight between his teammate Jean-Eric Vergne, but also the 2 Mercedes car, and seeing the new boys, Stoffel Vandoorne, Nick de Vries, in the Mercedes fight the old guard of the 2 Cheetahs, Vergne and Da Costa. I don't know, that just put a smile on my face, and I thought that was quite cool, especially when it was Vergne versus Vandoorne, I think it was, and de Vries versus Da Costa, all in like a square, going down to turn 1. That was super, super cool. And although Da Costa, for most of that battle, was at the back, generally kept out of trouble, Vandoorne had some kind of issue, and at about 26 minutes dropped back behind his teammate and behind that little group. Da Costa and Vergne managed to wiggle their way through that battle. Then they got behind the 2 Venturi cars, who those 2 practically took each other out as well. So then the 2 Cheetahs got in front of those 2 cars as well. Vergne, who had picked up a little bit of damage on the front left of his car earlier on in the E-Prix, eventually that damage got worse and worse and caused a massive smokescreen across the entire circuit. There was a bit of battling with his teammate, and again, in hindsight, if Vergne had just let him through, imagine the amount of time Da Costa could have saved, and very easily, I think, if Vergne had let him through, we probably could have seen a Da Costa victory today. However, Da Costa was able to get past Vergne eventually when Vergne pitted. Da Costa then was on a bit of a roll. He really had a point to prove with his new team. got past Pascal Wehrlein, got past Mitch Evans, and was hunting down Maxi Guenther and eventually overtook him. Overtook him for the race. It was a robust move, and I kind of squirmed in my seat a little bit when he made the move, because you know it's right on the edge, and there's nothing worse as a racing fan when the checkered flag falls not knowing whether there's a penalty. So at that stage, I thought, oh, it's 50-50. It really is, and we've seen those get given penalties before. We've also seen them be a little bit lenient in Formula E to those kind of argy-bargy moves. But the fact then Guenther got a bit of a second wind was brilliant to see, and actually you could see that hunger and fire was there. Da Costa, who was a little bit frustrated with his own engineers because they kind of miscalculated the battery, and I don't know whether they kind of miscalculated how long the E-Prix was going to be, because that's a big factor in Formula E, and it's something that we've seen teams get wrong before. So I don't quite know what went on there behind closed doors, but Guenther was able, on that final lap, going into the final sector, to make the move around the outside of the long left-hander, a peach of an overtake. We saw lots of cracking overtakes, but that was a great move from Maxi Guenther to claim his first victory. Well deserved, a real statement of intent this weekend, and in my predictions for the season, I had a gut feeling about Max, but he's really proven himself now, and though we saw a few little mistakes in Saudi Arabia, it's brilliant to see he's ironing those out very, very quickly, and I'm really interested to see what he can do for the rest of the season. We spoke about Max, we spoke about Da Costa, we pretty much spoke about Evans, led a big portion of those early stages, but fell away. Pascal Wehrlein, a little bit like a similar story to Mitch Evans actually, was in that fight for the lead in the early stages, and I was pretty confident it was either going to be Mitch or Pascal to take the victory. But that Mahindra car, especially late on with the charge of the two cheaters, the visual representation of how awful that Mahindra car gets when it starts to overheat was shocking. Really having to lift off early into the corners, and that very well could be driver management. But when you see where Jerome D'Ambrosio was this weekend, I really think they've got issues at Mahindra this season, and I am worried for them. They're a team I've always viewed kind of a little bit like Force India and Racing Point, always punching above their weight, but it just perhaps seems a little bit of a step too far this year, and I do worry a little bit. They were in prime position to fight for the win this weekend, and kind of lucked out into P4 thanks to De Vries having a penalty, and other drivers such as Jean-Eric Vergne, the two Venturi cars, having lots and lots of incidents. But P4, a big heap of points for Mahindra. They'll take it, but definitely work needs to be done. Behind the top four, there was still plenty of stories up and down the grid. The two Mercedes, another big haul of points from De Vries and Van Dorn. De Vries getting the better of his more experienced teammate this time out. But of course, although he just passed Mitch Evans on the final corner to get that first podium, had a penalty from earlier on in the race. I'm not too sure what that one was for. Once again in Formula E, almost half the grid picking up penalties for God knows what. And again, I might as well pick up on it now actually. That is an issue I had with today's race. I think the biggest glaring issue again in Formula E, that communication is lacking a little bit. It is only a 45-minute race, so there is less of a window. And I do understand that casual fans don't care. To be totally honest, they don't care who's picked up penalties and what they're for. So it is a very fine balance. And what I will also might as well just quickly mention is the production value of Formula E was mega this weekend. I wasn't too sure about Driver's Eye when I first saw it. I thought it was cool, but I didn't quite know how it would work in race conditions. The quality wasn't ridiculously good, so I thought, oh, maybe it'll ruin, maybe cheapen the effect of the race. I was wrong. I was totally wrong, especially with Felipe Massa and Stoffel Van Dorn when they were having battles, when it swapped over to that camera so suddenly and out of the blue. Brilliant. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Again, it's not one of those features that we need to see a whole lap of a driver doing. That's a little bit much for me. But in key moments where a driver's just catching up, I did enjoy that. So a lovely little feature. And also another lovely little feature was when Da Costa and Guenther were going up against each other in those closing stages, and they had both their radios on, being broadcast live. I really love that. It's the little things like that Formula One, need to improve on, but it's also something that Formula E do so well. But the two Mercedes, 5th and 6th, had a few issues today, but that's a big points haul and a real statement of intent from those two again. They always seem to be in shot wherever they were this weekend, fighting with other cars, trying to make sneaky overtakes work. A really good job from both of them, actually. And I would, so far in Season 6, single out BMW and Mercedes as being the two most consistent teams. And as we know, Formula E is all about consistency. And the man who finished behind the two Mercedes, Lucas Di Grassi, king of consistency, not only scored points again this weekend, and a good heap of points in P7, started 23rd. That's ridiculous. That 23rd to 7th on a street circuit, only 45 minutes. Stop it. Stop it. That is too spicy for anyone to handle. Lucas Di Grassi, ridiculous. Once again. And actually, the man behind him, James Collado, seems to be something he's developing. Is a little streak of consistency. Helped out with penalties like quite a few drivers today, but still kept his nose clean like quite a few of the rookies did. Didn't do anything super spectacular, but 2 points finishes in a row for James Collado, considering 12 months ago, Nelson Piquet Jr., the Formula E world champion, was really struggling for Jaguar. Yeah, Collado, just wanted to give him a bit of a mention there because I'm quite impressed with him. And I was critical of the decision to keep him or to bring him in, but not bad so far in Season 6. Behind him, Felipe Massa, a messy race is probably an understatement. It really was. We did see plenty of driver's eye with Felipe Massa this weekend, and actually in the early stages was fighting for some really good points finishing positions with P4 and P5 with his teammate Edo Mortara. There was a moment between the two of them, and I think that'll definitely come up in the briefing. But a little bit like Mahindra, as that race went on and on, they just seemed to go backwards and backwards. Seem to have issues with that car. Still, there seems to be a little bit more work to do. And our final points finisher, and I would just like to say, I don't think he's got the fastest lap. I couldn't find any information who has the fastest lap so far, so it's just currently in there at the moment. I don't know who's got it. Apologies. So Sam Bird, final points finisher in P10 with 1 point. A quiet day for Sam Bird. Was spun around in the early stages of the race thanks to contact, I believe, with Daniel Abt. Again, a very hectic race today. Memory is not helping me out too much. But Sam Bird to come away with a point, I think he'll be happy with that. But not a good weekend from Envision Virgin either. That is something to keep an eye on, I would say. Outside the top 10, Nico Muller. Not a fat lot to talk about Nico, but like James Collado, kept it clean. That's all he needs to be doing. Oliver Turvey, again, cracking in qualifying. Car really let him down. In the early stages, was up to P4, but ultimately didn't have the pace. P13, unlucky P13, Sebastian Buemi, still yet to score in Season 6. Really not having a good time, the Formula E champion. The driver who's got the most wins in Formula E, just not working out at the moment. Likewise with Daniel Abt, a driver who slowly has been getting better and better in Formula E, but again, doesn't seem to be working out too well so far in Season 6. Did finish in the top 10, but got smacked with a penalty for hitting the back of Felipe Massa. Robin Freins benefited from penalties, which finishing 15th and benefiting from penalties isn't brilliant. He really struggled this weekend, and considering how well he finished Season 5, I'm kind of expecting him to bounce back over the next few weekends, especially starting lower down in qualifying. Marc Inquart, P16, Ollie Rowland P17, Jerome D'Ambrosio P18 were our final finishers. Your non-finishers and your non-classified drivers, Brendan Hartley, Jean-Eric Verne, who had that little bit of damage that just caused absolute chaos, Eduardo Mortara, Andre Lotterer and Alex Sims, who both those two drivers had a really good start and actually were fighting for those early few stages and looked like they could be on some big points, but ultimately contact between the two of them caused them to be out of the race. Likewise with Neil Jarni, our P24 driver, also contact in the early stages and a big fat 0 points. Before we go, our drivers of the day, or at least my drivers of the day, I have gone with Max Guenther. I've got to include him. A great drive from the German this weekend. Lucas Di Grassi, just no words for Lucas Di Grassi, how ridiculous that drive was. And Antonio Felix da Costa, I do feel for him. I do think he probably should have had the win this weekend, but still getting used to that new team, and it still would have hurt seeing his old team pick up another victory in Season 6, but another really strong job from him today. And our final point of action before we go is the standings. And yes, your eyes are not deceiving you. Stoffel van Dorn is your championship leader. I know that's going to make a hell of a lot of you guys very, very happy indeed. Behind him is Alexander Sims, despite not scoring this weekend. Sam Bird stays in P3. Maxi Guenther, with his first points of the season, moves up to P4. Lucas Di Grassi is just 1 point behind him in P5. Da Costa moves up to P7. Evans up to P8. Pascal Wehrlein gets his first points of the season in P12. And drivers yet to score include Nico Muller, Oliver Turvey, Neil Jarni, Mark Inquart, and your Season 2 champion, Sebastian Buemi. Actually, inside the top 15 drivers, only one of the Formula E champions is there. Yeah, I'm liking Season 6 so far. I really am. And that's your lot from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this weekend's race in ABBFormula E. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments below. I believe it is the 14th of February, our next race, which takes us to Mexico. And if you haven't seen last year's Mexico E-Prix, I so recommend you go and visit that one. It was a fantastic race, and I am sure it's going to be an absolute classic once again. You know the drill. If you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. I'll be covering Formula E for a third season in a row. So if you want to keep up to date with all the Formula E news and whatever, really, feel free to subscribe. Thank you once again to Formula E for sending me highlights and clips throughout today's video. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one.